If there's one video I wasn't expecting to make at all this year, it's probably a review talking about this film, The Thursday Murder Club, which just came out on Netflix recently. Now, I have a long and storied history with this franchise, to tell you the truth. Back in the day, my girlfriend and I were searching for an interesting present for my dad, and he loves crime books, murder mysteries, and thrillers. On top of that, around that time, he was obsessed with Pointless, which was co-hosted by Richard Osman, who wrote the book. Thus we figured, oh well, here we go then, let's buy him the novel, which was only a year or so old at that point in time, and which had already seen the release of a sequel. Not too shabby if you ask me, good gift. We were pretty proud of ourselves, to tell you the truth, and so it filled me with so much joy, when instead of reading the book, he put it aside and never opened it, ever. Not once. I do so love when a gift is enjoyed. Oh well though, my mum read it, she enjoyed it, then my aunt did the same, and she liked it so much she went out to buy the sequel once she finished the original. Unsurprisingly, I do have a fair bit of bitterness towards this franchise now because, well, I guess I'm just really salty about all this. Regardless, it's very clearly a rather popular book series and has spawned multiple sequels. One for every year since it first released, so really he's just churning them out at a rapid rate. Good for him. Of course, as with any good book series in this day and age, Hollywood was inevitably going to be coming knocking with a big fat check to get the rights to make this for the big screen, because of course they were. So many films and TV shows in this day and age are adaptations, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's just something I've noticed. The reality is that when a book series has a big enough following, there will be a lot of potential viewers that could tune in, which in turn makes it a very attractive prospect. It wasn't until just this year that I actually realised they were making a movie based on this book, although apparently they already sold the rights off before the book even released. There was talk of this film being made in March 2020, but the book was first published in September. Good God, talk about jumping the gun. It did take a while to get the project up and running though, because by 2023, they still hadn't begun production. Then the labour strikes hit and everything slowed down yet again, until eventually it was filmed from June to September 2024. Almost a year of post-production as well. Having seen the film, didn't strike me as anything massively laborious. Is this a normal stretch of time? Or do they just sit on things until they're ready to release it? I'm not trying to be snarky, it's just a genuine question, really. Like I said though, all of this completely flew over the top of my head. I had no idea this film was coming out until I sat down to watch Netflix one evening and it was plastered over the front page. I will say I did watch the trailer, but even then I just didn't care. I think my partner and I looked at each other, we had a bit of a giggle and a snark about the franchise, and went about our day. Until of course we came to the release date and realised that we'd nothing else going on in our lives and we were very bored. I'm sure you know that annoying feeling when you want to sit down to watch something, but you don't know what to watch. And then you open Netflix or Disney+. And it's that same feeling of being hungry in a food court, but not craving anything specific. You end up being surrounded by too much choice, which makes it hard to make a proper decision on anything. That's how I felt the other day browsing Netflix, and so I clicked the first thing that appeared, and that was of course The Thursday Murder Club. That being said, I didn't just dive in raw without checking anything at all. I did have a quick peek at the cast, and then also the Rotten Tomatoes scores. First up, the cast and creative team. Damn, this is a really good cast. The lead four characters are played by Helen Mirren, Ben Kingsley, Pierce Brosnan, and Celia Imrie. Already, that is a big set of names, but it keeps building from there in the supporting cast. We've got Jonathan Pryce, David Tennant, Richard E. Grant. It is a really star-studded cast, which to me indicated one of two things. Either the film was going to be excellent, or it was simply a payday for a bunch of older actors to do something quick and relatively easy without much effort, and the result would be utter shit. I did then see, though, that the director is Chris Columbus, and this dude makes some of the most warming movies I've ever seen. Warming? Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The dude's films just feel like a nice warm hug from grandma, and they hold so much nostalgia. Home Alone 2, Mrs. Doubtfire, Bicentennial Man, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I know it gets hate now, but the first Percy Jackson movie was actually pretty good for what it was, and I do think it helped out with the popularity of the books immensely. The second one sucked, no doubt, but the first one was decent, just a very bad adaptation. Maybe his more recent films, such as Pixels and then The Christmas Chronicles 2, left a little to be desired when you think about it, but at the same time, I'm always willing to give somebody another chance when they have such a classic back catalogue of nostalgic hits. However, like I said, I also took a little look at Rotten Tomatoes, just to see what I could be walking into. I wouldn't want to discover that I'm watching one of the worst films of all time or anything of the sort. It would be rather annoying to be halfway through and slowly realise this film absolutely sucks, but still continuing on because I want to know who did it. That's the frustrating thing about the whodunit. It well and truly sucks you in regardless of quality. That being said, the scores did somewhat set my mind at ease. The critical score as of writing this is currently sitting on 75% approval off of 69 reviews, and the audience score is slightly lower at 67% off of 50 reviews. Now, are these the greatest scores in the world? Nah, not really, but at the same time, they're perfectly acceptable for light entertainment in the evening. I'm not going to walk out of this feeling ripped off, and maybe I would if I was in the cinemas, but for something that's simply being released on Netflix in my own house? Nah. I'm happy with this. So I sat down to watch it, and yeah, I think those scores are rather fair, all things considered. I very much like the film, and I think it would have had a slightly more favourable reception, but I can understand why some people might not like it. For me, I think the best part was the actual characters and their portrayals, rather than the storyline itself. There were certainly elements of that which were a lot of fun, but at the same time, I think as far as murder mysteries go, the story was a little bit lacking. I think it was too muddled up, and the payoffs for the most part were not very satisfying. Maybe it works better in a book format, but I wouldn't know because I haven't read this book at all, so I can't speak to whether the film was a good adaptation or not, and I have to simply judge it on its own merits. However, I did come out of it thinking there were a lot of moments where I was supposed to think, oh wow, that's crazy, I didn't pick up on that. But in practice, I just smiled and I moved on with my life. It wasn't a whodunit on the level of the greats, but it was still a very fun watch. Before we go any further though, I will say spoiler alert ahead, probably even more crucial than with a regular film because this is a murder mystery, and being spoiled can actually have an impact on your first time enjoyment in my experience. The story itself follows 4 elderly residents of retirement community Cooper's Chase, 3 of whom, Ron, a former union boss, Elizabeth, a former spy, and Ibrahim, a retired psychiatrist, formed the Thursday Murder Club, a gathering of amateur sleuths who try to figure out cold cases from long ago. The other founding member of their group is former police officer Penny, who's dying and unresponsive throughout the entirety of the film. A new member to the group at the start of the movie is Joyce Meadowcroft, a widow and retired nurse who's just moved to the community to have company in her twilight years since her high-flying daughter is so busy. They have a bit of fun trying to figure out who murdered a woman back in the day, with the majority of the suspicion falling upon the woman's boyfriend, who was apparently a friend of the police at the time and then disappeared shortly after the investigation finished. However, cold cases quickly become real life when one of the owners of the facility, Tony Curran, is seemingly murdered, with much of the suspicion falling onto his business partner with whom he'd been seen arguing, Ian Ventham. Elizabeth in particular goes hard into trying to investigate things, and along the way she finds herself being threatened. She and the club befriend an underappreciated police constable and conspire to get her added to the investigation, in exchange for giving them choice pieces of information that can help with their own investigations. Along the way, Elizabeth's husband, who has dementia, befriends the local groundskeeper Bogdan, a Polish immigrant working at the estate, who in turn reveals an old corpse to Elizabeth, which turns out to be the skeleton of the cold case boyfriend who'd gone missing all those years ago. On top of that, Ian Ventham gets murdered too, being stabbed with a syringe to make him overdose on fentanyl during a large protest of him trying to clear the local cemetery to build luxury apartments, which really does feel like it's actually illegal to do, but okay. Along the way, there are a bunch of red herring events and suspects, one of which being Ron's son, who's at first implicated since he has no alibi, before he reveals that he was simply having an affair with Ian's soon-to-be ex-wife, and thus, he does indeed have an alibi. Then there's also the reveal of noted criminal Bobby Tanner being the silent third partner in the business, and so after the death of Ian and Tony, he's the sole owner, and thus he's benefited greatly. There is the brief suggestion that perhaps he was behind things, but of course he isn't, and instead he's just a crooked man who's bringing in foreign workers into the country and then taking their passports away. This is then revealed to be the motive behind the murder of Tony Curran, who was actually killed by Bogdan. He'd been part of the scheme to bring in foreign workers too, paying them minimal wages and then holding their passports hostage as leverage against them. Whilst Bobby would give his share of the workers their passports back every now and again to allow them to leave and see their families, Tony would never do this sort of thing. And so this resulted in Bogdan breaking into his house and confronting him, and then a scuffle in which Tony is accidentally killed. However, that still leaves us with 2 dead bodies. Here's where the final reveal happens. Penny, the dying member of a group in a coma, is revealed to have killed that boyfriend all those years ago because she knew he was friendly with the cops and he'd simply be able to get away with it. Thus, she murdered him and she and her husband buried his body in the church cemetery. Since Ian Ventham was trying to dig up the cemetery to build apartments, he too had to die to try to protect the secret. Therefore, it's revealed that her husband John injected him on the day of the rally when he was being mobbed by all the old people, and he died. In the end, John murder-suicides with his wife, and it's all rather melancholy, although Joyce's daughter ends up buying the estate to save Cooper's Chase and ensures that they all have a place to live. There, that's the whole story. I wouldn't say it was the greatest plot of all time, don't get me wrong, there were clever moments and I thought the whole murder of Tony Curran, Bogdan's friendship with Stephen, and the passport reveal were all rather cleverly implemented. It was just the other 2 murders didn't quite do it for me. Simply put, Ian's death felt like it was building up to some big conspiracy that was going on. Obviously, you're meant to think that Bobby Tanner is the one behind it all, and that maybe it's going to be revealed that Ron's son is his enforcer, and he was the one that did the deed. Of course, this isn't true. And the fact that it was Bogdan that killed Tony Curran was good, but that's because we got to spend adequate time with him, and there were clues scattered throughout the story that gave you a chance to figure it out. However, that's not really the case with the other death. It didn't work because we don't spend enough time with this old man to really care about him that much. So when it's revealed at the end that the cold case murder was the wife, I thought, oh yeah, that's cool. But then the final killer being the husband, I just thought, I don't really care about this guy. And honestly, I don't care about this woman who's pretty much been a non-entity in the movie. It probably would have been much more impactful if she was simply sickly and bedridden, but maybe not in a coma, and could actually speak, and so you could properly see the bond between her and Elizabeth, as opposed to being told about it. I think that would have made the ending far more satisfying if that was the case. Plus, I just think they needed more scenes. That being said though, just because the final ending was a bit doesn't make the film bad. Far from it. I think the story is very compelling because of the characters. It's charming because it's a bunch of old people getting mixed up in events in the most ridiculous of ways. It sort of has that Agatha Christie charm about it, and the characters are also heartwarming and fun to watch, and I felt that each of them had more depth than I was expecting. That's probably what drove the film for me, just enjoyment of the characters and the dialogue and the situations. That's what felt like the A-plot, and the actual murders, they took a little bit of a back seat. On top of that, the film was very well acted across the board and was very beautifully shot. It's just warm and bright and beautiful. I'm so tired of grey tones and lacking colour. This was just what the doctor ordered for me. In the end, this film was a lot of fun. Even better that I simply got to watch it as part of my Netflix subscription. You gotta expect that after this there'll certainly be some sequels, and I will certainly be seated for those. However, judging by the pace that this was made, we won't be seeing them anytime soon. And so with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the Thursday Murder Club if you've watched it? Did you like it? Hate it? If you haven't, have I convinced you to watch it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.